Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the DIY Homebuyer Podcast, part of the DIY Homebuyer Academy. My name is Nick, your host, and today I am joined by a couple of my new friends, Trey and Caroline, serving the Alabama and Tennessee areas. I don't talk about it much. I was born down in Texas, and so I feel like I've got a little bit of like Southern, a little bit of the drawl, hanging out with you guys very well. The drawl may come out. It may be weird for listeners, but we'll see what happens. Trey, Caroline, I'm super glad to have you guys on. I think what you are doing with your business, Homepoint, is super fascinating. But would love for you to just take a couple minutes here to introduce yourself to the listeners and just share, at least at a very high level, what it is that you're building. And we'll get into even more of that as the podcast progresses.
Sure. I'm Caroline McMeans, and I am the broker of Homepoint. And Homepoint is a tech-forward residential brokerage where we offer flat fee services to buyers and sellers in both Alabama and Tennessee. And we're not only trying to create value through cost, but also value through process. And my husband, Trey. So I'm the real estate side, and then Trey is the tech side. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Trey McMeans. I've been working in software and technology probably over 12 years now. And what we're doing is combining technology into the process, still with an agent, but creating efficiencies, not only for us on the business side, but also, for a home buyer or seller, but also creating transparency through that, value add through different features that we have on the platform. And the idea is just to make the experience a better, more seamless and simplified, and also educate throughout that process.
Yeah. Love it. And we connected through LinkedIn. It's been interesting, like as I've been about a year now creating content related to DIY home buying and also just talking about the issues that I see within the real estate industry. Those posts are fairly polarizing. And so I'm always interested by the people that actually resonate with what it is that I'm saying, the message that I've been putting out. And so you guys had actually reached out to me after seeing some of the things that I had posted on LinkedIn and said, like, yeah, we get it. We're actually on board with a lot of these issues, and we're trying to solve them too, a little differently than I am. But there was immediate resonance there. And anytime that I have somebody within the real estate industry, especially a broker, somebody leading a brokerage that reaches out and says, hey, like, what you're saying is not crazy. I always appreciate having those kind of people. So I do think what you're building with Homepoint is amazing. But before we start talking about that, as I think about home buyers and people that are perhaps listening to this show, a lot of folks have probably heard that, okay, the real estate industry has changed. There was the big settlement lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors last year. You might have heard something about buyer broker agreements, and that buyers are now responsible for paying their agents commissions. It all has been a little bit confusing, especially for somebody that's just trying to get up to speed. And the messaging from agents as to what's changed ranges from everything's changed to absolutely nothing at all has changed. So I'd like to start the conversation here and just have from your perspective, what are the things that consumers should be aware of that have actually changed in the regulatory landscape for real estate in this past year?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because Alabama has recently introduced a law from the state legislation to revert the NAR change, at least around the buyer's agreement, having to be the first thing that they sign to, before touring a home if they want to get into the agency agreement, not just be a true customer, as a transaction broker here in Alabama. And I saw a lot of praise from that from the industry because, they don't want to get they don't want the pressure for a buyer to then sign an agreement when they just want to tour one home or what have you. And so it's been interesting to see Alabama push on that. I know there's some other states that also, have some legislation around that. But from just talking through the industry and seeing how, when we have buyer agents come to us on our listings, it has seemed to be more status quo still, at least in Alabama and the markets that we have been serving. Tennessee will still, like for us, we have one-time agreements when people go to our homes. So our agreements fluctuate depending on the situation that a customer is in. We don't beholden someone to just go and tour a home. But for me, when it comes to what the buyer should be understanding now in Alabama, since it's changed again, you can go tour a home, don't have to get into any sort of buyer agency agreement at that point. You just be treated as a customer while they're being a transaction broker essentially at that point. But there's still, Nick, and you can probably attest to this, there's still going to be some pressure once you go and tour that home with that agent to then continue services with them, whether or not you really want to get the one home that you just looked at or another.
I'll say one thing I'm noticing with sellers, I think, all the lawsuits is people are seeing it in the media, and what they're recognizing is like, oh, do I actually have to pay this compensation? Or it's starting to bring questions up from both the buyers and the sellers. And so it gives us the opportunity to help educate, because I think for so long, the narrative has been sellers just pay for all the commission, and that's just how it's done. When in reality, everyone has the option. So a seller obviously has the option to not pay a buyer's agent commission if they don't want to. Like Trey was saying, we're still typically seeing that be the status quo here. I'm curious what people are seeing across the country, but it's at least people are having the conversation. And for us, what we like about, I guess, our services is just being transparent in what our fee structure is. So even as a buyer, even if you really want a house that a seller isn't offering buyer's agent compensation on, you at least know upfront, okay, my fee is only going to be $5,000. That's maybe less daunting than $15,000 or whatever that cost may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the seller standpoint, what are you seeing? I know you're speaking to your markets within Tennessee and Alabama, but are you seeing that most sellers are still making some sort of offer of buyer compensation, or what is that looking like?
I am. I try to guide my sellers to think about net proceeds rather than just thinking about like buyer's agent compensation. Because obviously, if they can get a higher purchase price, and agent compensation might be different, like a different percentage range. At the end of the day, net proceeds is what matters. So, and we don't do a co-op agreement or anything like that. So I think that's good to know.
Yeah, the way we end up structuring the buyer's agent commission is essentially marked on the contract as a concession, is the way it's kind of written. Of course, the language is different depending on each state, but the way our contract works with our advice is that's the way it's done.
Yeah, and I guess just if anybody's kind of wondering what exactly that means, like the difference is how the money gets routed, right? Because in cooperative compensation, it would be that the listing agreement has a larger percentage that the seller is committed to the listing agent. And then the listing agent says, if there is a buyer's agent, then I'll split that, generally about 50-50. But the buyer agent actually gets paid from the listing agent's brokerage. So all of the money comes from the seller to the listing agent's brokerage and then gets split to the buyer agent. You're saying you don't do that anymore, that now there's just one agreement between the listing agent and the home seller, and that for the buyer, if they have an agent that's getting compensated, then the seller is making a concession, much like they would if they were making a concession for repairs, like credit for a roof replacement or something like that. So the money is going directly from the seller's proceeds to the agent. Is that a fair way of putting the difference there?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way. Yeah. And, when we're talking with our sellers too, like thinking about, are there different ways we can negotiate? Like if someone's asking for a really high seller concession and a high buyer's agent commission, can we negotiate one of those down a little bit to just have higher proceeds to our seller?
Sure. I think it's really fascinating too, with you serving both Alabama and Tennessee, in that one state has taken state level action against the buyer agency agreements. And so you're having to navigate that. And then in Tennessee, where it is, you've got the buyer agency agreements. And so these agreements have been controversial because obviously, if you have one state that's saying, no, we're not doing it, clearly there's a controversy there. But part of the reason why they've been controversial is because since they were introduced August of 2024, they often get home buyers locked into an exclusive agency agreement. And I've seen sometimes for 6 all the way up to 12 months with like unlimited areas. That is the one opportunity for buyers to negotiate compensation. And so I've had a number of folks that have come to me saying that, yeah, I got, basically, I was on the doorstep of a home. An agent handed me this agreement, said, I can't let you into the home until you've signed this. And then lo and behold, they've committed themselves to an exclusive agency agreement for 12 months to somebody. And then they find a couple weeks later that like, this person's terrible. I do not want to work with them. So I'd really love to just get your thoughts on the buyer agency agreements. Some of this here is asking you to opine. Are they good? Are they bad? But then I also want to get into the practical side of what do buyers need to be aware of if they are choosing to work with an agent before they sign one of these buyer agency agreements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my perspective, it's interesting that now that Alabama's changed it, like I said, that we saw the industry open up and say this is a good thing. And I do think that there is, it's a fine line of what we're running with, where maybe I do want to go see a home today in Alabama and I don't want to have to sign an agreement. But in the states where it's still required through, the MLSs that require it, I would say it would be best for brokerages and agencies to have these options that are clearly stated in these agreements for buyers who want to just do the one-time tours, or maybe it's, they're in town, maybe they're out of state, they're in town, they want to do 3 days. But really, to me, it comes back to, and your question was, what should buyers be asking when they're choosing an agent? And I won't mention the name, but I went through a modern, it's not really a platform, but a modern solution that's supposed to matchmake you with agents to see how that process worked. They're gaining some traction. And, I was just handed 4 agents. 4 agents started texting me and saying, well, we can, I can help you. But there was no matchmaking. There was no credentials, like how many homes have they sold or have helped someone buy? And also how many homes have they sold? What markets did they specifically work in? What's their process for helping you to understand the comps of a home? Anyways, going through the details. And that's something that buyers should really take time to, one, of course, there's still the referrals from, people who have used them specifically, but they need to be asking detailed questions on, well, did you have any things that came up during the process, especially once, the offer is accepted and you're in the closing process? How did they work through that with with that client? How do they help them in the search process more than just handing them the homes, or are they doing something that's more unique where they're able to actually find inventory that you as a buyer, may not be privy to immediately? Caroline, what do you think?
Yeah, one thing I'll share is a little bit of a personal story. And one reason, we started Homepoint, I would say. So this was, I don't know, probably 8 years ago. This was actually before I had my real estate license, but I've been working in real estate for several years, specifically in affordable housing development. So working on large transactions, from acquisition all the way through development, stabilization. So like I get the real estate process.
Yeah.
And so I had already bought a condo, actually off market, no real estate agents previously. So had gone through one acquisition that way. And then I was going to buy another home, did not have a real estate agent representing me. And actually the house that I wanted to tour, the agent, she toured it. She opened up the door, let me tour it. I wrote an offer and she said, well, my ask, I said, since I'm not having a real estate agent represent me, I would like the discount on the purchase price from, whatever the seller's offering and buyer's agent commission. And excuse me, the agent came back and said like, oh, well, we just can't do that. I'm going to have to represent you. Here's my agreement to represent you through this transaction. And I was like, well, I don't want your representation. What I want is a discount on the purchase price because I'm not using a real estate agent and I'm capable of going through this process alone. And she's like, well, that's just not possible because the agreement has already been made and our brokerage cannot change that agreement. And so what's so unfortunate, I ended up walking away from that house, but what's unfortunate, I doubt that real estate agent ever took my offer to her client. And when you are talking about fiduciary duty and, just kind of the bigger philosophy of that. And, I'm sure those sellers would have gladly have said, yeah, I don't want to pay an additional 3% commission. And I would rather take that off the purchase price to get this house under contract and close in the next 30 days. But I'm sure that offer wasn't even presented to them. So for me, that was extremely frustrating. And that just showed, obviously that was 8 years ago. Homepoint, has been further down the road. But for me, that experience just showed that there's such a lack of options for buyers and sellers, to be quite honest. And somebody who does have the confidence to do it and, the skill set or whatever else, the system that's been created puts you at a disadvantage and doesn't give you those opportunities. And so for us and for me, Homepoint, I'm really passionate about both buyer and seller education. And what you're doing, Nick, is incredible because there are a lot of people in this country who are very capable of doing the process without a real estate agent, and they should do it. But for people who do want help, support, representation, negotiation through the process, you should use a real estate agent. I just like that there are now coming to the surface some different options. And I feel like the settlement has kind of brought to consumers the visibility, I would say, and some of these conversations. I think more should be done, but that's just my experience. Yeah. I'm hoping this is a positive start.
I love that story, though. And I think that a lot of the listeners to this show, the DIY home buyers, the people that are thinking about going through this process on their own can relate to it. Because even in you say that, was many years ago, but I've talked with so many buyers that are still having a very similar experience where they are talking with a listing agent. They're saying, hey, I'm not looking for you to represent me. I don't want to be your client. I just want to be treated as a customer here. And I also want to realize the savings of not having another agent that's a party to this transaction. And they're getting stonewalled by these agents. And then there is the question about whether or not, if they make an offer, if the agent is actually sharing that with the seller and how they're representing that offer. And so that has been a pervasive problem. And it's something that in my own way, I'm trying to address it, raise awareness about it, partner with some different consumer advocacy groups. I think it'll eventually lead to loss. The reason that I highlight this is because I think that the genesis story of what I'm doing and what you guys are doing, there's actually a lot of alignment there. And it's just taken two different approaches. And so the approach that you've taken, and I'll let you unpack it further, but the best that I understand it is that you are still truly representing buyers. They go to contract as a represented buyer. You're helping them get access to homes as a represented buyer, but you're doing so at a very fair, very affordable, reasonable fee. And I think that that's really interesting because then the second piece to that is that you're actually helping buyers realize a lot of the savings that they would have had if they were going with a full service. I'm sorry, not to say that you're not full service, but the traditional agent that does a 3% commission. You're saying whatever the difference is between your fee and what the seller would typically pay, you're actually helping the buyer get back in credits and saving people an incredible amount of money on homes. And so it's a different route, but the goal is ultimately still the same, which is to empower home buyers and make the real estate process more financially efficient. So that's my big no details overview. I would love for you to, one, correct me wherever I'm wrong, but then two, talk to us about what it is that you're actually doing and how Homepoint works.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up an interesting point of what is the traditional, what is full service, what is discount, what is alternative. I've landed on alternative, an alternative model because it's absolutely still full service. And if you go and try and find a definition of full service, good luck on, one that's a standard defined. It's all still a little bit nuanced. Now, what I've kind of derived is, as long as you are still able to facilitate all the aspects that you would normally consider full service, it's still full service. I mean, if you do an open house with an agent and they're a full service agency, they may have a junior agent go do the open house. That doesn't mean they're not a full service agent. They facilitated that open house. It's the same thing. So what we do on the buying side with Homepoint, people can onboard, they go on the platform, they hit sign up, they are beginning their journey to home buying. So we don't support, we don't even have searching on our site. We want people to use whatever buying portal, whatever they like using. We won't name them, but there's plenty out there.
Well, that's like a Zillow, Redfin, the big search engines.
Yeah. So they'll use those. They'll find the homes. They may have automated searches up and they get the listings, but then they go put the address in of the home on Homepoint. They hit add. So they then have this interested list of homes. They'll hit schedule tour. So we charge $50 a showing, which we credit back once you close on a home. So we just had a buyer do 10 showings before they closed. So they paid $500 up front, over time during their process, but then they ended up paying us $4,500. So it was always still $5,000. So you meet with an agent there at the home. It's just like, any other process there. They're just going to answer general questions. They're not your agent. They're not taking commission on it. They're essentially a door opener. And then if you say you want to make an offer on that home, you actually go back onto Homepoint. And we still, we communicate with people throughout the process however they wish, but they'll go onto Homepoint, click create an offer, and then they'll sort of draft an outline of what they want to do. And so we receive that outline, and then we consult with them to then create, we'll consult with the listing agent, we'll do more market research, and then we have a consultation with that buyer and say, well, here's what we think you should adjust on this offer based on the market, based on the activity of the home, and we will craft this final offer, which when we send off, and that's really how the buying, the purchasing part of it actually occurs. Now, there's more that we can talk about as far as the transaction from that point, but we just had a buyer in Mountain Brook, Alabama, which is probably one of the most competitive markets in the state, and also one of the highest median home prices market in the state. And they saved $28,000. They were able to apply that to their offer since it's so competitive. And that's, ultimately, we think what got them the home since it's so competitive.
Yeah. So the way that works, like we said, a lot of the homes that are listed here are still offering a buyer's agent commission. So, on a $1 million home, we're still only taking a $5,000 commissions. That delta of the 3% or 2.5%, we call that buying power. So, that offer is immediately $25,000 higher, or, whatever the percentage breakout is. And that can go towards, again, on a really competitive home, that will be higher net proceeds to the seller, or on a home that's, not as competitive. You're not trying to, compete other offers. We can pencil that in as a seller concession. So that can help cover closing costs for buyers, help, buy down interest rates, miss all sorts of different things. But for us, we want that commission difference to really help empower buyers, to just have stronger offers. Or even for first-time home buyers, that could be a game changer. Like if they had an additional $4,000 of concessions to help with closing costs, like that can really, drive whether someone can close on a home at the end of the day. So that's how we're structuring it.
Yeah. So when we talk about fees, it sounds like things are pretty transparent and upfront. So you've got a fee structure where it's $5,000 to buy a home using you at Homepoint. That gives you both access to the platform as well as access to you, Caroline, as the broker who's going to help with all of the negotiations, putting together the contract. But that $5,000, that's in more of the traditional way. Like that isn't actually due until closing, and usually that's coming out of what the seller was already planning to pay for buyer agent commission. So the only upfront potential costs for a buyer would be those showings, which is $50 a showing. And Trey, like you were saying, that gets credited back to the buyer so that if they do close on a home, it just comes off of that $5,000. And that's amazing in terms of the ceiling that you set on what Homepoint's fees are. This would be, to use just industry vernacular, flat fee arrangement, right? Where
Exactly.
it doesn't really matter the size or the expense of the home or how many homes somebody is looking at. It's $5,000. So I would love to hear, you mentioned the folks that saved 28,000. You mentioned like a first-time home buyer that could save 4,000. I mean, I think it'd be fascinating to just hear sort of a case study. You could choose anybody that you've worked with, but just to hear like from the very first time that they heard of Homepoint, how they got onboarded with you, what that process looked like, and all the way through the close.
Yeah. So I would say the one who just closed in Mountain Brook is probably, it's because he's like, I was on a bunch of different sites, so he's not exactly
He
sure.
said he found us on Reddit.
Yeah, pretty sure he was on Reddit.
Nice.
So I've been on there just kind of stirring up a little bit. But
good on you, man.
Yeah, it's an interesting community out there, especially on the real estate threads. It's pretty wild. But essentially it was around flat fee buying, and he's moving from Tennessee to Alabama. Familiar with the area. They knew where they.
Well, and I'll just share, they had a traditional real estate agent for a year before we started working with them. And he just was so frustrated with the process because he said they missed out on a house because she wasn't able to give them a tour and turn around the offer as quickly as it needed to be turned around. Because, she was out of town or something. And our model, the way our model works is like, I don't go show any homes. We utilize a gig network called Showami to go, give people tours. So it's like Uber. Like if you're touring a house, you say, I want to tour 123 Main Street at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. That gig goes out to Showami and a real estate agent picks it up and goes and meets you. So it's like, these get booked instantly in like 3-5 minutes. So the turnaround there is super quick. And you're not contingent on my schedule. And so that
ability is much
yeah.
better.
So our, the buyer we were working with, that was a huge value add for him because he was so frustrated with the process because he said his offer would have been like $100,000 over what was actually accepted. Because again, this is a very competitive market that he was in. So anyways, that I think that adds a little to the story too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he found us on Reddit, signed up, and then I think he signed up at maybe 6:00 at night. We were on the phone with him at 7:20. We always just send out a message saying, feel free to let us know if you want to talk through it. It's still, even though we're introducing technology into it, there's still absolutely, and I think will continue to be a human piece through all parts of it, especially when you want to trust somebody. You just go and sign up on a platform, depending on what the actual level of support is. With us, we're still full service. So we want to reach out and let people know that they can talk to us and trust us through the process. But yeah, we talked to him and then he said, this looks amazing. He was familiar with technology and, in the technology sector. So that was a helpful thing that he just was comfortable with it from the get-go. But then he said, well, I'm going to be driving down. I guess it was the next weekend. I'm going to schedule 3-4 homes. And that's what he did for, I guess his search was about 3 weeks. So I would say 3 weeks to a month. And we put in 2 other offers for him throughout the process. And when we say it's competitive market, there were homes that were going for hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking. So he worked through that, and he actually even scheduled an inspection while driving back to Tennessee. So we do upfront, like you can book an inspection on Homepoint, see the pricing. It's a local, certified inspector who goes and does that, and everything is delivered. So he actually scheduled that on his way back to Tennessee once he found a home that he was, certain he wanted to buy.
Yeah. And with the inspection, and the whole escrow process, really, were there further negotiations or things that you needed to do to guide him through that? Or is a lot of that handled still just on the platform with being able for the buyer to see kind of where they're at in the process, or kind of a hybrid of both?
Yeah, so it's a hybrid of both. So one thing visually, if you guys are aware, if you've ever ordered a Domino pizza, there's that Domino pizza tracker of like your pizza's been ordered, it's being made, it's en route. So we have that on our platform, like through your entire process for both buyers and sellers. So once you'll see that for scheduling tours, and then once you're submitting offers, and then once you're actually under contract, and then there's a module for all the steps of your contract and like timelines associated with whatever is specifically in your contract. So that helps keep me, it helps keep you, everyone accountable to those timelines. And we think that's extremely transparent and just like clear. So we call that our dashboard. So every buyer has their own dashboard journey. So you see that, but then I'm also helping you through the process, like getting through if there's a inspection contingency, getting you through that process. If there's a financing contingency, getting through that process. If there's any like repair negotiation, I'm handling that directly with the other real estate agent on your behalf. So I'm definitely, in the mix, making sure title's being ordered, making sure, the closing attorneys doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's not just kind of a free for all for our buyers once you're under contract. We help, but we also feel like our platform just it helps streamline. So it just helps streamline and make the process more efficient.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think that the efficiency is one of the big things that the real estate industry has lacked, and why it's ultimately that lack of efficiency harms consumers. At least the consumers that actually close on a house. It seems like the real estate fees have been so high because agents are having to compensate, charge the heck out of the people that actually do close to compensate for all the free work that they've done for the 60-70% of buyers that never did end up moving forward on a contract. And so I think it's a really smart model where there is a lot of human interaction and touch, where they have your expertise to guide them through contracts, negotiations, contingencies, but also that you're not having to have the buyer compensate you for all your time of traveling to every single home and spending 2 or 3 hours at every single inspection. And it does sound like it gives the buyer a lot more control, autonomy, transparency as to what goes into the whole real estate process. So I'm curious, where I'm going with all this is that it's like, okay, this is a pretty brilliant and I'm not just saying that. Like we've talked before, like I love what you're doing. I think it is really, really smart. Why hasn't anybody else built a brokerage like this? Have you thought through, like I'm really curious why it feels like this is so novel when it's such a smart idea.
Yeah. There are transaction management software. And what I've been seeing is that, and this was an option from the beginning that we talked through, like, are we going to be a tool for agents? Is that the way, to make the most money, to have a real software company, blah, 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 blah. I've been a founder before, been CTO of other startups, and that, you always land in, well, we're going to be another SaaS company and make this product for agents to use. And honestly, that was not exciting to me. And it wasn't also, we quickly landed in this more of a, it's a mission oriented company where we don't want to land in this traditional model. We don't want to be a part of what's fueling, some of the legal issues and these settlements that are going on. Being fueled, by the traditional ecosystem. And so with that being said, then it was, okay, so if we're going to make the process more transparent, more efficient, these transaction management software that brokerages use, at least from what I've gathered in research, it's more so about making it more efficient and better for the brokerage. So the internal teams. And there's a little bit of consumer pro-consumer features and value add there, but it's not to the level that we're doing at Homepoint. Like for me, and when we're designing the features, it's all about making the process really better for the consumer first, which obviously trickles down to us as an internal team. As to, I think it's really because it's hard being a brokerage and starting a brokerage and getting into the saturated market. Having the combination without having to spend a bunch of money to build a tech platform is probably rare for someone who's in real estate to have a technical co-founder. I mean, if they're not married to them, then they've got to agree that, the plan that they have to have synergy, which is another hard part when you're a technical co-founder and not. I think all of that really is just a pretty big barrier for. Maybe say it's a great brokerage. They do, they're pro-consumer. That's a pretty high barrier of entry, especially now it's getting lower as, we see AI proficiency and people who are non-technical able to build software. But you're still talking about, I mean, if you wanted to put a contract price, $100,000 plus on building out a software platform, that's super centric to your customers and not so much yourself.
I'll also add, Trey and I are a little bit of outsiders to the residential world. So, I've been in real estate for the past 10 years, but that has primarily been in commercial. So commercial development, condo development. I've had my broker's license for a while. And so I did not, as an agent, have this huge book of business on the residential side where I'm making 3% on every deal. So my perspective already was different. And my perspective as an owner who has, developed 40 residential condos downtown and paid a real estate agent 6% on both sides, or 3%, buyer's agent, 3% listing agent. I'm like, dang, these commissions are very expensive. So being kind of in that seat and understanding the financial side of that and knowing there's got to be a more efficient way that is consumer, friendly. And then talking with Trey, Trey is amazing. And he'll even come up with ideas. Honestly, even the buying model when he's like, yeah, we'll get people to pay $50 to go to our house and someone random will show up. I was like, people are not going to do that. But people are doing it and it seems to really be working. So it's almost like a combination of, Trey is throwing big ideas on the wall. I'm a little hesitant, but I can roll with it and figure it out. So there's a little bit of flexibility there that I think makes us different. And what is also unique, some of these really large national brokerages, yes, they probably could afford to build out software like this, but do they have the incentive to? I think that's the big question because they've built a huge, very profitable business on the current commission structure. And I don't believe they can unwind that. I think people would be very mad working under them if now all of a sudden there's this other flat fee opportunity. I don't know how that shakes out. So
the menu of options for these larger brokerages would probably, it wouldn't jive with what exists.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see how they're working through that. And for us being a small, nimble company, being able to pivot. And, for me, my dream of Homepoint, I would love, I want to grow this to be a national company. And I think the model is different. I think we probably have salaried employees that are real estate agents. They have their license. They, are licensed across several states. And basically, really what my role is, I'm just a remote real estate agent. I'm a virtual real estate agent. I still give you all the services, but I'm not physically showing up to your house or I'm not physically giving you a tour to a home, but that doesn't mean you're not having any less of a service. I mean, you see industries across our whole country. All industries are adopting to that in some way. And it's time for real estate to just use technology to become more efficient. And that's really how you drive affordability, in my opinion.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, going back to something, Trey, that you had said, I wrote it down of that, thinking about different models and one of the questions is always well, what's the model that would make the most money? And I think that that's what most tech companies and startups do. And also what's the safest way to make the most money? And so trying to if you were to just build a platform to plug into the existing system, probably wouldn't have been too difficult to find agents and people that would want to buy that. But I love the distinction that it's could have done that, but this is driven by something more than just money. This is driven by a mission to see this industry changed and improved from the consumer standpoint and how much that ties into your own experience, Caroline. And I love what you said about just being somewhat of an outsider, but also just recognizing that, that the change that we see that needs to happen is not going to come from the big brokerages because they are hamstrung, frankly, by their model. Their margins are actually quite razor thin. And if because brokerages make their money off of their splits from their agents, if their agents start to significantly reduce their commissions, then those splits in revenue for brokers are getting smaller. Anyway, it's the whole thing is, I got thoughts on it, obviously, that probably are beyond the scope of the conversation here, but it's why what you're doing is so refreshing and also why I think that you're right, that it needs to start at ground zero. Maybe my last question for you though, and just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, Because I can imagine that somebody who's wanting to buy a home, they're looking at different agents, different options. And so let's say they come across Homepoint through Reddit, but then they're also interviewing a traditional buyer agent that wants the 3% buyer agency agreement. And they ask that the traditional agent, they say, why should I go with you instead of using a Homepoint and doing a flat fee that's going to be maybe a third of the cost? I could see that agent being like, well, you're not going to get nearly the level of service from them that you would from me, because how can they possibly tell you what to watch out for in a property if they're not seeing it? And how can they protect you when they don't know you? I'm just curious, how would you overcome those objections? Because I can imagine those being the most common sort of things that an agent would use to downplay the value of your service.
Yeah, fair question. So I would say, and this is where we, as a small company, we're definitely getting better into kind of getting out the education and the marketing to power through these type questions, at least on the landing page and seeing our company firsthand. For the inspection process, there's only so much that agent is going to be able to see up front on the home, unless they're truly a qualified inspector to also go through the house. So that would be my answer to that, is that if the buyer has concerns over what we can't see just on photos, and maybe there's video attached, but we can also facilitate a little bit more digging into it too, if the buyer really wanted to do so with the network that we have of people who can go. But, that's where I would land on that, is that, it's really going to come down to a truly qualified inspector who, whether that's before or whether that's after, depending on the risk, what we see being risk, what the buyer has seen at the home. We are leaning on the buyer to bring that up. And, I will say the agents who go and do those tours with the buyers, they're not just, we have had great feedback that they're not just standing there and, crossing their arms and letting them walk through the house. They are conversing and having conversations with the buyer as they walk through the home.
I'll just add too, for us, it's all about consumer choice. So if you as a buyer feel like if you feel very overwhelmed through the process and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking for, maybe you're a first time home buyer and everything's just so overwhelming, maybe you do need a traditional agent, and that's okay. We're not trying to disparage that at all. That is a great option. And if you feel more comfortable with having someone who's, you're a fiduciary to you, at every single tour, looking out for you, eyes on the home, that may be a better route, and that's okay. And I think what we're just trying to do is give another option.
Yeah, I love that.
We definitely have the ability to gather the intel needed, to push off the risk adverse there.
Yeah. Well, and this is not to put words in your mouth, but just as I'm kind of completing the thought exercise myself, I was joking with some friends about this in the traditional real estate business, how much realtors are actually they're kind of the hub for professional network, but realtors in and of themselves are actually qualified to speak to very little. To your point, Trey, a realtor is not a home inspector and should be very careful not to get outside of their lane when they speak to potential issues within a home, because unless they have the licensing and qualification to do so, it's dangerous. We also see that in the legal, all the contract side, where real estate agents are not attorneys. And so one of the most scary things or dangerous things is when a realtor starts drafting up addendums to contracts, because they're not really qualified or trained to write those sort of legal agreements. And we could, talk about how realtors are also the ones that are connecting people with contractors or with title agents or all of those things. But what I think you've done a really good job of with Homepoint is boiling down, okay, what are the essential things that a realtor truly does and adds value to in the transaction? And how do we really excel at those things? And then, how do we make the connections in a much more efficient way where, it's not as high of a demand on your time? I also just think, when I think about the first time home buyer that may feel overwhelmed. I was having a conversation with another reporter this a couple weeks ago, and she was just talking about the first-time homebuyer experience. But one of my big concerns for first-time homebuyers is that they generally do take longer. It's generally a lower price point. And when an agent is going on a commission base where they make more money when the buyer spends more, and hourly wise, it's way better for them, for the buyer to close quickly. I think it creates a really unfortunate dynamic where the buyer agent, who's supposed to have a fiduciary responsibility to their client, is financially incentivized to get the client to spend more and close quickly. And that's what I really love about your model, with it being the flat fee of the $5,000. Like, it doesn't matter how expensive of a home you buy or how long it takes you to find it. The $5,000 fee is what it is. And I also like the efficiency of that. It's like, and yeah, there will be the $50 to, tour a home anytime you want to go out. But frankly, a lot of people are spending $50 on Uber to go out on a Friday night as it is anyway. And at least the home buying is a much more, ultimately profitable endeavor for folks. So I could go on and on about all of the things that I'm really excited about that you're doing. I don't know if there's anything that I said there that raised a thought or a question.
Well, I'll
go ahead.
share a story based on exactly what you just said about a first-time home buyer. I was at the physical therapist, and the admin at the front desk, you chit-chat when you're there, and she was like, yeah, I'm looking to buy my first house. And I was like, oh, I'm in real estate. Like, she's like, yeah, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And I could tell she was talking to me. She was about to start crying. And she's like, I just feel like my real estate agent is pushing me. And she's like, I don't know. She's like, I'm not getting any information from my mortgage lender. And she's like, I just feel overwhelmed with the costs, and, no one's giving me any information. And I was like, look, let me just send you a breakdown of what closing costs look like, and what all these different components of cost associated with buying your first home. Because she's like, basically she got hooked up with this real estate agent. She's showing her houses. She already told the agent, she's like, I don't know, I feel really fatigued. I guess they had a house that was at the very top of their budget. They made an offer on it. Offer didn't get accepted. And I guess she realized, she was like, I just can't afford any of these houses she's showing me. And so I guess after I sent her all this information just via email, just being friendly, she came back to me a week later. She's like, hey, Caroline, I just want to let you know. She's like, thank you so much for actually taking the time to explain this to me. Cause she's like, no one has. No one gives me any information. She's like, I realize I need to wait probably until December before I'm really ready to start buying a house. And I've decided to fire my real estate agent. And the real estate agent's comment back to her was like, oh, well, I can find cheaper homes for you. It's just the continue of selling. And it's like, when you have a customer actually telling you, I'm not in the place to buy right now, I need to pause. Again, if you're their fiduciary, you should say, I respect that decision, or I agree. Or you probably should have told them up front that they couldn't afford the houses that they were looking at anyways. So anyways, I think that's just a testament. And, she told me, she was like, when we're ready, I really want to work with you because you're the first person who actually educated me. And I think that's just powerful as well. Instead of, again, pushing first-time home buyers to expand their budget based on the commission that you're making. That's just not right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a fantastic story. I absolutely love it, and probably a good place to pin this conversation. Though it's a delight to talk with you both, and I look forward to having you back on. Before we do a final wrap, I'm sure that there are folks that are going to listen to this and have a similar experience to that first-time home buyer of like, I think I'd like to work with them. So currently in Tennessee and Alabama, with the goal to expand across the country. But right now, what's the best place for people to connect with you, whether they're in Tennessee and Alabama or whether they just want to follow your journey and make sure that as soon as you launch in other states, they know?
Homepoint.co is the website. You can go sign up. There's no commitment or anything, just to explore what we're offering. If you even want to just go and kind of start making your draft listing and see how that process works, you can go there. Phone numbers on the website. Feel free to text or call us. And then, of course, we're on social media as well. Just search Homepoint. We're on all the major ones.
Yeah, and there's also a newsletter on the website. If you're not ready to buy or sell, you can sign up for a newsletter. Especially if you're in any of the southern states, please reach out to us because those are states that we're looking at expanding in the near future. If you're in Georgia or Mississippi or Louisiana or anywhere like that, reach out and maybe we can proactively move to your state.
Cool. Well, I will put all of those links in the description below. So listeners, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on a podcast platform, find that information. Do be sure to connect with Homepoint, connect with Trey and Caroline, follow along. Hopefully this show is proof as well for those few real estate agents that like to listen in. I don't hate realtors. I don't hate brokers, especially when those folks are doing the kinds of things that you're doing, which is seeking to find new models, new ways to provide real value to consumers. So I really applaud your efforts. Consider you both, friends and allies towards building and realizing a better future of home buying. And I should mention too, just before we go, this is obviously DIY Homebuyer Podcast, but that's one of the beauties is while I really only serve home buyers with my academy, you serve home sellers as well. And so it's very kind of you to indulge me on just really speaking to buyer related issues. But there's a whole nother side to your business that we could have explored on how you help sellers as well. So if you are looking at buying or selling a home in Alabama, Tennessee, considering in the South, listeners, I couldn't encourage you more highly than to reach out to Homepoint here. But thank you all so much for indulging me in the conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Looking forward to staying in touch and wish you all the best as you keep building.
Thank you, Nick. Likewise, we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And kudos to you. And we really, appreciate what you're doing too with the DIY.
Thanks so much. All right, listeners, we'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody.